The corn was dying in a pattern. Margaret saw it from her tractor, a geometric spiral of wilting stalks radiating from a central point in the neighbor's field. Not drought damage, not herbicide drift, something systematic, intentional. She pulled over and walked to the edge of her property line, binoculars raised. Through the lenses she could see them, thousands of insects swarming the dying corn. But not any insects she recognized from 30 years of farming. These moved wrong, too coordinated, too purposeful. Margaret's mind, trained by 18 years at DARPA before she'd traded genetic engineering for organic farming, immediately began analyzing what she was seeing. Swarm behavior, artificial, not emergent, movement pattern, programmed, not instinctual. Target selection, specific crops, not opportunistic feeding. This wasn't a natural infestation, this was a biological attack. Someone had released genetically modified insects, designed to destroy agricultural crops. And judging by the spread pattern she was witnessing, they'd chosen Iowa corn country, the breadbasket of America, as ground zero. Margaret pulled out her phone, but hesitated. Call the USDA and risk panic? Risk the attackers knowing they'd been detected and accelerating the timeline? Or use the knowledge she'd spent nearly 2 decades trying to forget and stop this herself before it spread beyond containment? The insects were moving toward her farm now, toward her bees, toward her crops. Margaret had left DARPA because she couldn't live with creating weapons that could devastate ecosystems. Today, she'd have to use that knowledge to stop someone else's bioweapon, because Margaret Hayes knew 2 things most farmers didn't: how to raise bees and grow organic corn, and how to recognize a genetically engineered agricultural apocalypse when she saw one. Welcome to True Human Tales. Before we continue this powerful story of hidden expertise, agricultural danger, and bioterrorism prevention, tell me in the comments, from which city in the world are you watching this video today? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support the channel. We're building a community that honors those whose knowledge protects us from threats we never see coming. Let's get started. Margaret Hayes' farm sat on 640 acres of prime Iowa agricultural land, 20 miles outside Cedar Rapids. The property had been in continuous cultivation since 1874, passing through 4 different families before Margaret bought it in 2006 with savings from a career she never discussed with her neighbors. The farm was a model of organic agriculture, heritage corn varieties that had been grown in Iowa for over a century, rotation crops that enriched rather than depleted the soil, and the centerpiece of the operation, 50 honeybee colonies that pollinated her crops and produced award-winning honey that sold at farmers' markets throughout eastern Iowa. Margaret's apiary was legendary among local beekeepers. Her colonies never collapsed. Her queens lived longer than average. Her honey production exceeded commercial operations despite using no chemical treatments or artificial feeding. When other beekeepers struggled with mites, disease, or mysterious die-offs, Margaret's bees thrived. At 64, Margaret looked exactly like what people expected from an organic farmer. Silver hair usually hidden under a wide-brimmed hat, face weathered from decades of outdoor work, hands calloused from hive maintenance and field work. She wore practical clothing, denim overalls, work boots, cotton shirts in summer and flannel in winter. What made Margaret different wasn't visible. It was in the way she observed her bees with scientific precision, the way she analyzed soil composition with techniques that seemed too sophisticated for small-scale farming, the way she sometimes used terminology that didn't quite match her farmer persona: genetic diversity instead of variety, population dynamics instead of colony health, ecosystem resilience instead of crop rotation. Because before Margaret Hayes became one of Iowa's most successful organic beekeepers, she'd been Dr. Margaret Elizabeth Hayes, Ph.D. in molecular biology, senior bioengineering scientist at DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. From 1988 to 2006, Margaret had worked on some of the most classified agricultural research in the United States. Her early projects focused on beneficial applications, crops that could grow in hostile environments, plants resistant to natural pests, agricultural systems that could support troops in remote locations. But her final 5 years at DARPA had been darker. Project Pestilence, agricultural bioweapons, genetically modified insects designed to devastate enemy food supplies, the kind of research that could collapse entire agricultural systems and cause mass starvation as a weapon of war. Margaret had been brilliant at it, too brilliant. Her modifications created insects that could target specific crops with devastating efficiency, reproduce at accelerated rates, and resist conventional pest control methods. She'd left in 2006, unable to reconcile her love of nature with weaponizing it. The Iowa farm had been therapy, working with natural systems instead of corrupting them, helping ecosystems thrive instead of engineering their destruction. For 18 years, it had worked perfectly, until today. When Margaret looked through her binoculars at Tom Rodriguez's cornfield and recognized the swarm behavior patterns of exactly the kind of weapon she'd once designed. Margaret drove her truck to the edge of Tom's property, where she could see the damage more clearly. The spiral pattern was unmistakable, not random crop failure, but a calculated spread design that maximized coverage while minimizing early detection. She pulled out her phone and opened the camera, zooming in on the swarming insects. Through the lens, she could see details that confirmed her worst suspicions. The insects were approximately 8 to 12 millimeters in length, iridescent carapace, not natural coloring, but the result of genetic modification affecting chitin production. 6 legs with enhanced gripping structures, mandibles that showed clear signs of engineering for specific plant tissue penetration, and the movement pattern. Too coordinated, too efficient. This wasn't natural insect behavior. It was programmed response to chemical signatures in specific crops. Margaret's hands didn't shake. 18 years away from DARPA hadn't diminished her analytical skills, but her heart was racing because she knew exactly what she was looking at. This wasn't just any agricultural bioweapon. This was based on her work, her designs, the specifications she'd developed during Project Pestilence. Someone had either stolen her research or recreated it independently. And they'd chosen Iowa corn country, the heart of American agriculture, to deploy it. Margaret made a decision. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number she'd kept but never used, the one they told her to call if she ever saw evidence of agricultural bioterrorism. The phone rang 3 times before a professional voice answered, "USDA Foreign Agricultural Service, how may I direct your call?" "This is Dr. Margaret Hayes, former DARPA, Biological Technologies Office Security Clearance Yankee White, inactive since 2006. I need to report a credible bioterrorism event, agricultural bioweapon deployment in progress. Location, rural Iowa, approximately 20 miles west of Cedar Rapids. Estimated threat level, catastrophic if not contained within 72 hours. There was a pause. Then, "Dr. Hayes, can you hold while I transfer you to—" "No," Margaret interrupted. "Every minute we spend on phone transfers is time the infestation spreads. I need you to contact Dr. Patricia Chen at CDC Bioterrorism Rapid Response. Tell her Margaret Hayes says we have a pestilence protocol situation. She'll know what that means." Another pause. "Dr. Hayes, I'm going to need verification of my employee ID was BT4472. My last project code was PP07 classified. My supervisor was Dr. James Morrison, who retired in 2011. Call him if you need verification, but do it while you're also scrambling a response team, because this situation is exponential and we are losing containment as we speak." Margaret's voice had changed, no longer the friendly organic farmer. This was the DARPA scientist, precise, authoritative, accustomed to being listened to when she spoke about biological threats. "Hold, please," the voice said, suddenly more urgent. 2 minutes later, a different voice came on the line. Female. Familiar. "Margaret? Pat Chen? I haven't heard your voice in 18 years. Tell me you're not calling about what I think you're calling about." "I'm standing on my farm in Iowa, looking at a genetic modification deployment that matches pestilence protocol specifications," Margaret said. "Spiral dispersal pattern, enhanced reproductive rates, target-specific feeding behavior. It's our work, Pat, or something based on it." Jesus, Patricia Chen's professionalism cracked for just a second. Then, "How long since initial deployment?" "Based on crop damage progression and insect population density, I'd estimate 72 to 96 hours. "Spread radius?" Currently approximately 3 miles, but it's exponential. Each infected plant becomes a breeding ground. If this follows our original projections, 8 days to regional infestation, Patricia finished, 14 days to multi-state crisis. Margaret, we need you on site with the response team. I'm already on site. This is happening in my neighbor's field. There was a long pause. They chose your farm? They chose Iowa corn country. My farm just happens to be here. But yes, the irony isn't lost on me. We're scrambling a team now. Quarantine protocols, CDC, USDA, possibly FBI if this is foreign. Can you collect samples without contaminating yourself? Pat, I've been beekeeping for 18 years. I know how to handle insects safely. These aren't regular insects. I know. I helped design their ancestors. Within 2 hours, Margaret's farm had been transformed into a command center. USDA vehicles filled her driveway. CDC personnel in biosafety suits collected samples from Tom's infected field. FBI agents interviewed neighbors about any suspicious activity in the previous week. And Margaret stood in her barn-turned laboratory, examining the insects under her old research microscope that she'd kept just in case. Dr. Patricia Chen, now a senior CDC bioterrorism specialist, stood beside her, watching the screen as Margaret manipulated the digital imagery. It's definitely based on our work, Margaret said, highlighting specific genetic markers. But there are modifications I didn't design. Look at the reproductive cycle. They've accelerated it beyond what we achieved. And this feeding mechanism, it's more aggressive, less selective. Meaning? Meaning whoever did this wasn't trying to create a surgical weapon. They wanted something that would cause maximum damage, fast, indiscriminate. Patricia studied the images. Can you stop it? Margaret was quiet for a moment. The original pestilence protocol designs included kill switches, genetic vulnerabilities that would allow rapid population collapse if needed. If these insects follow our basic architecture, those vulnerabilities might still exist. Might? I'd need to sequence their genome, compare it to our original work, see what they kept and what they changed. But yes, theoretically, I can create a counter-agent, something that exploits their genetic modifications to trigger population collapse. How long? 72 hours if I have access to a proper lab and genetic sequencing equipment. Patricia made a call. We're airlifting you to CDC Atlanta, full lab access, whatever you need. I'm not leaving my farm, Margaret said. My bees are here. My research notes are here, and I work better in my own space. Margaret, bring the equipment here. I have a laboratory set up in my barn that's sufficient for what I need. And I'm not leaving my bees to die while I'm working in some Atlanta facility. Patricia studied her former colleague. You really love those bees, don't you? They're natural. Pure. Everything my old work wasn't. Margaret looked at the microscope screen, at the engineered monstrosity someone had created. That's why I have to stop this. Because if these things reach my apiary, they'll destroy everything I've built here, everything I've spent 18 years protecting. The equipment arrived by military helicopter within 6 hours. CDC brought portable genetic sequencers. USDA provided crop analysis tools. The FBI set up secure communications. And Margaret went to work. For 60 hours straight, she barely slept. Patricia Chen stayed with her, running interference with the various agencies that wanted reports, updates, press statements. Margaret ignored all of it. She sequenced the insect's genome, compared it to her archived pestilence protocol notes, identified the genetic vulnerabilities that whoever created this weapon had either overlooked or couldn't eliminate without compromising the insect's effectiveness. And she designed a counter-agent, not another insect. That would just add more genetic pollution to an ecosystem already under attack. Instead, Margaret engineered a targeted pathogen, a virus that would infect only insects, carrying the specific genetic markers of the bioweapon. It was elegant, surgical, and it would cause the entire population to collapse within 48 hours of deployment. Will it affect native species? Patricia asked, reviewing Margaret's work. No, the virus is too specific. It'll only target insects with these 3 genetic modifications, none of which exist in nature. And your bees? Will be completely unaffected. Margaret looked at Patricia. I made sure of that. The counter-agent was deployed by agricultural crop dusters across the infected region. Margaret insisted on being in the first plane, watching as the spray misted across Tom Rodriguez's dying cornfield. 46 hours later, the bioweapon insects were dead. All of them. The investigation revealed that a disgruntled former DARPA contractor had recreated Margaret's work using stolen research files and sold it to an agricultural terrorism cell that wanted to destabilize the U.S. food supply. They'd chosen Iowa because they thought no one would recognize a sophisticated bioweapon in the middle of farm country. They didn't know that one of the scientists who designed the original weapon had been living there for 18 years, keeping bees and growing organic corn. Margaret declined the classified commendation from the Department of Defense. She declined the interview requests from news outlets that somehow got wind of the story despite the classification, but she accepted a small brass plaque that Tom Rodriguez made in his workshop. It read simply, "To Margaret, who saved our farms. Thank you." She hung it in her barn, right next to her old DARPA security badge that she'd kept in a drawer for nearly 2 decades. Because some people leave dangerous work to find peace, but when danger finds them in their peaceful place, they remember who they were, and they use that knowledge to protect what they've built. So now I ask you, have you ever met someone like Margaret? Someone whose peaceful life hid expertise that could save thousands? Someone who hoped never to use old skills again, but deployed them to stop catastrophe? Someone whose knowledge of creating danger became knowledge of preventing it? Tell us their story in the comments. Say their name. Tell us what city you're watching from today. Because at the Human Stories, we believe redemption is real. Weapons scientists become organic farmers. Engineers of destruction become protectors of nature. Creators of bioweapons become keepers of bees. And when the darkness they once helped create returns, they stand ready, not to destroy, but to defend. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, subscribe and share it. Help us honor those who left dangerous knowledge behind, but kept it sharp enough to protect us when needed. We publish human stories that matter every single week. We'll see you in the next one. And remember, if you ever meet someone whose simple life seems to hide complex knowledge, don't underestimate them, because sometimes the gentlest hands have held the most dangerous tools, and sometimes those hands are the only ones that know how to stop the danger when it returns.